folks, you might notice that the next 3 videos of me have me in pajamas with wet hair and braids. It's possible that I filmed them all in one night because I realized I didn't have time to do it spread out anymore because I had procrastinated too much because I don't understand how to time management anymore. Yeah, but today we're going to talk about The Vegetarian by Kang, so, you know, that's cool. This book is written by Kang and translated by Deborah Smith. It's pretty dang short. It's a little itty bitty book. It was originally written in Korean because Kang is a Korean writer. It is currently nominated for the Man Booker International Prize, which goes to a work that was translated, and I'm super excited to talk about it with you guys. Now, this is part of a series of videos that I'm doing where I'm talking about how to read and review books in translation. The first video I did was how to choose a book that has been translated and how to read it if you have some issues. This is going to be an example review, and then my next video will be me talking about which specific things I think are definitely important when talking about a book that has been translated. I'm going to start how I would with any review and tell you what I thought of this book. It was so powerful. This isn't a happy book. This isn't necessarily a sad book. It's more a desperate book. And despite the fact that the protagonist, in a way, you never get to see her point of view, and you are only seeing her through the eyes of other people, you just feel her crying out for help. And every inch of this book is built to make people feel uncomfortable. That, I believe, is purposeful, and I think it is portrayed very well for a translated text. Now, there are some things that I think a lot of people who are in the Western audience are not going to understand because it has to do with Korean culture, and I want to touch on that because it is coming from a different culture. The way that characters interact is going to be different. I did my thesis on Korean literature and translation. Most of the things that I read were short stories, and while this is a novel, it's a very short novel, and I think that that is because the Korean literature and history is all very short fiction. They don't have these huge, long, sprawling novels like you would get here. That isn't to say they don't exist, they're just not the norm. You get these bite-sized stories that are more to the point and don't have flowery language that go on and on and on. And on top of that, they're all these very moving, sad stories, which is in opposition to what we normally think of as South Korean culture. When you look at K-pop and K-idols, they're all bright colors and fun and whimsy, and the literature I was reading was all very dark. And it makes sense with Korean history because it is a country that has been ravaged by war. China took them over, they get their stuff back. Japan takes them over, they get their stuff back. They have an uprising. Their country eventually splits in half. The South Korea that a lot of these works are coming from is then back in the old system, and people are still unhappy. There was a reason for that uprising originally, and it comes out in a student rebellion in the 80s. And things are better now in a way, but they're not entirely better. There's still sort of this mask of calm, and that's something I think that you see a lot in this novel, this mask of calm. To give you a brief introduction to the plot, it is about a woman who has a dream, and from that dream decides that she is going to stop eating meat, and how all of the people around her react to that. I'm going to do this by talking about the 3 perspectives we get. The first perspective is her husband, the second perspective is her sister's husband, and the third perspective is her sister herself. And they all look in onto what is happening to her through various points in the timeline, and we never get to hear her voice. It's always taken in by this other person and manipulated in a way that suits their own point of view. I think starting with her husband was a really good choice from a writer's perspective, because we get to see the person who is supposed to care about her the most, and the person who is supposed to find her the most beautiful, the best, at least in a Western standpoint, showing that he is completely indifferent to her, and the only real reason he picked her as a wife is because she was agreeable and would not affect his lifestyle. Now, I can't say, because I have not met any Korean men, whether or not this is indicative of all Korean men, but I do know that there is a very strong cultural insistence in Korea for people to toe the line. They are meant to have a place in society and to stay in their place. And if you are a man in Korean society and you work for your money and you like your job, you wouldn't want a wife who would cause trouble for you. There's certain things that you sort of expect out of your relationships, and he expects a obedient wife who makes him dinner when he comes home, who spends time with him. He doesn't necessarily want her to love him. He doesn't necessarily want to love her. He just wants to have a happy, calm lifestyle. Now, I didn't see him as a particularly horrible character, but a lot of people who have read this book have said that he is so heartless. And I don't think it's that he's heartless. He is definitely selfish. If I was going to call a character heartless, I would definitely call the brother-in-law heartless. He did not notice his sister-in-law at all until she decides to become a vegetarian. And I will talk about the meat-eating issue later, but right now I'm talking about the perspective, so we'll get there. Don't worry about it. He doesn't see her as anything special until he hears from his wife that she has this weird birthmark. And because he's an artist, he's obsessed with this weird birthmark, and it sexually stimulates him, which is a little bit weird, but he seems to be okay with it. He seems to continue and be alright. It's all looking back in the past in his own memories, and he's not acting on them in any way when they interact. It isn't until she stops eating meat and becomes some sort of special thing that is breaking the rules that artists seem to be drawn to that he begins obsessing over her and lusting after her and spending all of these times and sort of manipulating her into a situation where he eventually has sex with her. I would say that this is maybe a trigger warning for rape. You don't get it from her perspective, which made it a little bit easier for me, a rape victim, to read it, because while I could empathize with what was happening to her, I didn't have to be in that mindset again. I could have the distance of a person who isn't understanding what is happening to this woman and in her mind, and just living in the moment for himself and being completely selfish. And that is definitely a trait that is prevalent in the men in this book. Again, I can't say whether this is something that has to do with all Korean men. I have not interacted with enough of them, but Korean culture definitely puts women as subservient to men, at least traditionally. From what I hear in modern Korea, this is changing. More women are getting jobs and becoming more equal. A lot of people said that even 5 years ago, it was like the 50s in America. So the woman was expected to be a housewife. The woman was expected to listen to the husband and not make any decisions. The final perspective that we get is her sister, and I think that her sister is the most empathetic character towards what is going on in her life. She acts out in a way because of her husband's actions, and has been towing the line that she's expected to do, and doesn't quite understand why her sister is breaking out of this role. And they have conversations, and she begins wondering about her own life, about her own decisions, about her sister's choices, and all of these things come together at the end where you get this genuine moment of caring, even though it isn't completely resolved, and you don't know exactly what happens in the end. You aren't sure how it worked out for the two of them. It does imply, though, that the sister is coming over to her point of view, that she's starting to believe what her sister is doing and understands it, even if she herself isn't going to act on it in the same way. From what I've seen of reviews of this online from a bunch of people, is that there is one particular scene that they are very confused about that happens very early on in the book, where her husband basically calls her parents, calls her brother-in-law, calls her sister, calls her brother, and says, she's not eating meat, it's worrying me, it's weird, and they say, don't worry, we'll have a family dinner. And that dinner revolves out of control, and it gets to this really aggressive state. Now, I don't think that it is normal for it to reach the amount of physical violence that goes on during that scene, but I can understand from what I have learned of Korean culture that refusing to eat with other people is an extremely offensive gesture, especially to people you are supposed to show respect to, your elders, your parents. When they say that you need to do something, you are going to do it. It's just expected of you. In the same way that if a Western person's parents said, take out the trash, and your kid said, no, I'm not taking out the trash, I don't believe in taking out the trash, it's just as insane of a concept for them as that would be. Food sharing is an extremely important part of Korean culture. A lot of people have talked about mukbangs, or food porn. It technically means food room, but it's a live streamer who eats food, and one of the reasons that people say it's so popular in Korea is because single people can sit and eat with each other. There are some restaurants that won't let you eat unless you're with another person. You need to have this sharing culture, and they have one big plate that everybody eats from. You don't get your own individual plate like Western society does. You have this sharing culture of sharing food, sharing drinks, sharing stories. It's a very communal act, and it's important to them. And meat is a very big part of it, especially expensive meat. Showing expensive meat and eating expensive meat is a kind of gesture of kindness and care for people, and rejecting that is a huge affront. You can see in the secondary characters in that scene how they feel like her father went too far. As he gets more and more aggressive, a lot of them start speaking out and feeling uncomfortable, but they don't act on it because they are still programmed to show respect to your elder, to let them do what they're going to do, because you saying no isn't something you're able to do. You aren't supposed to. You aren't even supposed to take a shot while facing your elder. You have to turn away. There's all of these cultural things that say that you need to step down. You don't have a place to say no. The mother's reaction after this, when she's in the hospital and she makes her food and feeds it to her, that seems like a more Korean thing to me. It's her worrying about her daughter's health, and therefore she makes something, and she says, oh, don't tell her there's meat in it. She'll just eat it and she won't know. And her daughter does know, but in that same way, she's just trying to care for her. She thinks that she will be unhealthy if she doesn't eat meat. And yes, it's manipulative and goes around the corner, but I think that that's more in line as opposed to the aggressive holding her down and force-feeding her route. There's a line here where our protagonist says, your body is the only thing you have control over. And I think that this whole argument throughout this book of like her not eating meat is more of a way of saying that she's tired of being told what to do by her husband, by her brother-in-law, by her father, by all of these things. And yes, it devolves into an eating disorder that eventually does affect her health, but the core argument in this book is talking about Korean culture and the culture of subservience, especially in women, especially in young women. She's always expected to answer to somebody else. She can't choose anything for herself except for what she puts into her body. I think that this translated extremely well. It all comes to this point where you are feeling uncomfortable. You're feeling like she's constantly being smothered and carted around and manipulated, doing what other people tell her. And when she says no and acts like this is fine and isn't embarrassed about saying no and isn't making excuses for herself, it comes across. And that's something I think we can all relate to. I think that's all I have to say about this novel. It's really good. It's short. If you can pick it up, I would highly recommend it. I will be back tomorrow to talk about another sad book, because apparently I was reading lots of sad books on vacation. That is weird, but maybe the vacation helped with that? I don't know. We'll see. So I will talk to you tomorrow. Bye!